Hello, everyone. This is the 176th episode of the Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog. I am pleased to have Irish freelance writer, historian, and broadcaster Mr. John O'Carroll once again back on the podcast. For this episode, we continue our interview series with Mr. O'Carroll as we discuss the matches of the Republic of Ireland national team during the 1990-91 season. Welcome back, John.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Great to be back.
Last time, it was more than a year ago, we left off at the end of the 1990 World Cup. Can you take us back to the fall of 1990 and the state of the Republic of Ireland national team following a relatively successful World Cup in Italy?
Yeah, expectations were high. There was a great feel-good factor in the country. We had reached the quarterfinals of the 1990 World Cup, so that contributed to an overall sense of optimism, and there was a great feel-good factor there. It was somewhat tempered by the fact that we were drawn in an extremely difficult qualifying group for the 1992 European Championships. We were drawn with England, who there wasn't really a lot to choose between us and them at that particular time. And we were also drawn with both Poland and Turkey, who would both provide formidable opposition. So, and with only one team qualifying, qualification in those days for the Euros was always difficult. But despite all that, there was a great feel good optimism. And the fact that we had qualified for two consecutive tournaments, some were of the few that maybe we should be qualifying for just about everything at this stage, which, as you know, is always easier said than done. But even though it was going to be difficult, there was genuine optimism there that we had finally arrived on the world stage and we were going to be there for some time to come. And looking back in hindsight, Jahan, what is significant is that from this time, namely the autumn of 1990, I would say up to the World Cup of 1994, this was when the Irish team were really at their zenith. This was really, I suppose, in many ways, the best period that we enjoyed with that particular team and under Jack Charlton, because we had established ourselves at this stage as being one of the best teams in the world. We were about to uncover some new players, as you'll mention, I'm sure, as the season goes on. And for once, actually, we actually began to score goals, which was to be a major help as well. Because up to now, we did have a problem, particularly with goal scoring. Because even if you go back to the 1990 World Cup, Shahan, I mean, we scored 2 goals in 5 games. And you could make the argument that both those goals, certainly one of them anyway, was of the fortunate variety. So, I mean, goal scoring had been a problem up to the 1990 World Cup and maybe in the World Cup itself. But from now, shall we say, up to 94 or thereabouts, we began to score goals regularly, which was a great help as well because it meant that our defence, well, there was always going to be pressure on the defence, but the workload on the defence was going to be somewhat lightened to an extent.
In short, the Irish were a very difficult team to defeat that not many look forward to playing. But like you said, there was a goal scoring problem on top of that as
Yeah,
well.
yes. Yeah, but thankfully, as I say, kind of from the autumn 1990 on, we began to score a bit more freely than we had in previous seasons.
The season starts with a friendly at Dublin against Morocco on September 12th, 1990.
That friendly was actually in Dalymount Park. It was actually the last international that to date that has been played in Dalymount Park. I think what happened was, you see, Lansdowne Road was unavailable that September for some reason or another, so they played the game in Dalymount Park because there was actually a bit of disquiet about it because some people felt that, seeing that it was the first game after Italia 90, it should be played in Lansdowne, a bigger stadium to get, to allow more people attend. But it ended up anyway being in Dalymount Park, which, as I said, was actually the last international game that was played there. And I'd safely say, Shahan, there won't be any further international games played in Dalymount Park at this stage.
This match was against Morocco, first friendly of the season. The team is still managed by the Englishman Jack H. Charlton since 1986. For this match, we have the following lineup. Paddy Bonner of Celtic Glasgow in goal. Making his international debut, Dennis
Yeah.
Irwin of Manchester United. Captain of the team, Mick McCarthy from Millwall. David O'Leary of Arsenal. Steve Staunton of Liverpool. Ray Houghton of Liverpool. Ronnie Whelan of Liverpool. Andy Townsend of Chelsea. He'd be replaced by John Sheridan of Sheffield Wednesday in the 65th minute. Mark Kelly of Portsmouth. This was his fourth and final cap. His first cap had been 1988. He'd be replaced by Alan McLaughlin of Swindon Town in the 70th minute. David Kelly of Leicester. Niall Quinn of Manchester City. And he'd be replaced by Tony Cascarino of Aston Villa in the 59th minute. The match ended as a 1-0 win for the Irish. It was decided in the 74th minute when Whelan's cross from the left side was headed across by Cascarino to David Kelly on the left, who volleyed it in. And the Irish won this first friendly of the season 1-0. This match marked the international debut of Dennis Irwin. What can you say about his status at this point, and was it self-evident that he would become one of the most emblematic players of the Charlton era?
Well, Dennis Irwin had come to prominence with Oldham Athletic. And the previous season, as you know, the 89-90 season, Oldham, they were in the English second division at the time, which would be the English Championship nowadays, but they had a great run in both domestic cup competitions in England. They had something of an epic run to the FA Cup semi-finals, and they also got to the League Cup final as well. So Dennis would have been an integral part of the Oldham team at that time, and Oldham's extended run in both the English domestic cup competitions propelled him onto something of the national stage, both here in Ireland and also in England. And that particular summer, even though he didn't make the Irish World Cup squad, that summer he was sold to Manchester United. Alex Ferguson signed him, and Alex Ferguson even has gone on record on a number of occasions saying that Dennis Irwin was one of the best signings he ever made while he was Manchester United manager. So, yeah, Dennis Irwin was an up-and-coming player at that stage. He had got his move to Manchester United, which would have given him even greater exposure. And as it turned out, he proved to be a fantastic servant both to Manchester United and, of course, to the Republic of Ireland in the years to come. Now, you mentioned as well that the game was played in Dalymount Park. This was the last international to date that has been played in Dalymount Park. Dalymount Park for many years was, and is still regarded by maybe some of the older Irish soccer supporters as the spiritual home of Irish soccer, because certainly up to the 1970s, it was Ireland's international ground. But I suppose maybe with the growing popularity of the Irish team and the fact, with I suppose safety considerations, and that the matches were eventually moved to Lansdowne Road, which is now the Aviva Stadium, where they have been played more or less ever since then. But yeah, this game was played in Dalymount Park. It was televised live on RTÉ television here in Ireland, because Dalymount Park would have had something of a reduced capacity. And by that stage, I mean, Ireland had just come off the back of the World Cup, so the game was always going to be a sellout. Now, there was some disquiet at the time, Shahan, as to why this game wasn't played in Lansdowne Road, to facilitate a bigger attendance. But it appears that for some reason Lansdowne Road was unavailable this particular September, so they decided to play the game in Dalymount Park. It was something of a disappointing game overall. There wasn't too many takeaways from it, apart from Dennis Irwin's debut, obviously. But as a spectacle, the game was quite poor, because I remember actually watching the game on television. But why Jack Charlton opted for Morocco as opposition in this friendly game was he felt that they played a similar type of soccer to Turkey, who we were going to play the following month in October in our first game in the Euro qualifiers. So Jack felt that a game against opposition such as Morocco would really be ideal preparation for this upcoming game against Turkey. But Ireland won that game against Morocco, but there wasn't too many takeaways. It was really a forgettable game, and if it is on YouTube, I would suggest to people to fairly skip over it or, condense the highlights if they can, because yeah, it was fairly uneventful. Except Ireland won the game, and needless to say, it was a good run out for some players ahead of the following month when the serious business was going to begin with that European Championship qualifier against Turkey.
That match would be on October 17th at Dublin, this time at Lansdowne Road. For this first qualifier for the Euros, we have the following lineup for the Republic of Ireland: Bonner, Irvin, McCarthy, captain of the team, O'Leary, Chris Hughton of Tottenham, Houghton, Townsend. He'd be replaced by Kevin Moran of Blackburn Rovers in the 73rd minute, Sheridan, Staunton, John Aldridge playing at Real Sociedad in Spain, Niall Quinn, and he'd be replaced by Tony Cascarino in the 68th minute. This would be a goal fest for the Irish, which is a rare indeed. On the 15th minute, Houghton's shot was parried by the Turkish goalkeeper and John Aldridge knocked in the rebound. In the 40th minute, David O'Leary scored a second goal. Sheridan's free kick from the left was headed by McCarthy. It struck a defender and O'Leary knocked in the loose ball. So 2-0 by halftime. In the 57th minute, Aldridge scored his second goal. From the middle, O'Leary passed to the right to Aldridge, who struck in the third. 64th minute, Niall Quinn scores the fourth goal. Dennis Irvin's cross from the right was headed by Aldridge towards Quinn in the middle, and he shot past the Turkish goalkeeper. Aldridge scores his hat trick in the 72nd minute. A shot by Aldridge himself was handled in the box, and the Irish were awarded a penalty kick, and Aldridge scored from the penalty spot. 5-0 win. Afterwards, John Aldridge thanked Jackie Charlton for persevering with him all these years. After this display, was the whole question mark regarding John Aldridge's goal output in green colors over?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair summation to make, Shahan, because first of all, we have to say that I suppose in many ways it was the first time that, dare I say, the term champagne football you could describe to this particular performance, because certainly one of the better performances up to now of the Charlton era, because as far as I can recall, we had only scored 5 goals on one previous occasion under Jack, and that was a friendly back in 1987 against Israel. But yeah, I mean, this was really a good performance, even though, okay, admittedly, Turkey were somewhat poor on the day, perhaps. And then maybe I suppose, the old millstone of the state of the Lansdowne Road pitch maybe might have played into the Republic of Ireland's hands as well. But I mean, nevertheless, I do remember watching that game. It was a great performance. The goals actually flowed freely, which was something up to then had been something of a rare occurrence. But thankfully, as we will see in some of the matches that were to follow this, the goals were to come along more plentifully. So, yeah, I think it was finally the day that maybe John Aldridge's, shall we say, lack of goal scoring ability at international level up to now was finally put to bed. Because, I mean, we had scored 5 goals. And the other thing about that, Shahan, was that it kind of put us on the front foot straight away as regards qualification, because the fact that not only had we won the match, but we had a healthy goal difference, I mean, that put pressure as well on both England and Poland, who played each other later that evening at Wembley, which was a game, by the way, that England were to win 2-0. But yeah, I mean, the fact that we had scored goals, it was a great help to us, because in a group that was going to be as tight as this group was to turn out, goal difference could become a very major factor indeed in it. And if you had a healthy goal difference, certainly a goal difference that was more healthier than your rivals in the group, it was almost like having an extra point in the qualification table. So yeah, a 5-0 win. The performance was good all around. We really we knocked the ball around a bit that day, which was pleasing to see as well. Because I think at this stage as well, Shahan, even though we were still it was still predominantly our plan A. We were kind of moving away from this long ball stuff to an extent because up to then there was a joke going around that Ireland were regarded as the Wimbledon of international football. Wimbledon being a soccer club that kind of came to prominence at this time, through a long ball type of game. But as well as using the long ball, we began to knock the ball around a bit as well. And maybe Shahan too, that was a sign of a growing confidence in the players that, okay, we had got to the European Championships in '88, we had come off a reasonably successful World Cup. So maybe the players too were confident, that they were that they were good international players, and maybe that gave them the confidence as well to play a more expansive type of game and maybe knock the ball around a bit more, which was a bit more pleasing on the eye. So all told, anyway, a capacity crowd, and needless to say, game televised live again, as indeed all games, both home and away, were being televised live around at this stage. Such was the interest in the Irish international team. And yeah, a 5-0 win, and it certainly put us on the front foot from the outset as regards qualification for the Euros. Now, should point out as well, Shahan, just one other point about the television coverage. By this stage as well, there was a great interest in the Republic of Ireland national team in Great Britain. And because of that, ITV signed a deal with the FAI, which was to continue up to 1994, whereby all of Ireland's games in Dublin would be televised live on ITV. So, I mean, an audience in Great Britain got to see these Ireland games as well, which was
Yes.
great exposure as well, both for the players. Well, I mean, some of the players were already established at their clubs, but shall we say, for up and coming players, this was great exposure. And of course, I mean, it also brought the exploits of the Irish team very much live to an English and a British audience.
We should also mention that on October 8th, 1990, Frank Stapleton officially announced his international retirement. So,
Yeah.
all in
Yeah.
all, John Aldridge was the main avenue for goals now, along with Niall Quinn.
Now, this wasn't noticed, shall we say, in the margin of victory, but of course, prior to that game as well, Paul McGrath, as you may know, was a late withdrawal because actually he was named to play, but he actually arrived and on demand of the match. Unfortunately, he was kind of going through some personal problems at the time, so he was a very late withdrawal from the team. But as it turned out anyway, thankfully his absence wasn't missed on the day.
The next qualifier was the first key encounter in this group against England. Now, of
Mm.
course, the sides had met just months earlier at the 1990 World Cup in a match that ended as a 1-1 tie. And also, just 2 years prior, they had met at the 1988 Euros. So they were familiar to one another, shall we say. Now, England were now managed by Graham Taylor, who'd been appointed after the 8-year reign of Bobby Robson. He still had the core of the 1990 successful England team to call upon, and the new captain was Gary Lineker. For this match on November 14th at Dublin at Lansdowne Road, we have the following lineup: Bonner, Chris Morris of Celtic Glasgow, McCarthy, captain of the team, O'Leary, Staunton, Houghton, Paul McGrath of Aston Villa, Whelan. He'd be replaced by Alan McLaughlin in the 74th minute, Townsend, Aldridge, Niall Quinn, and he'd be replaced once again by Tony Cascarino in the 61st minute. As you'd expect, it would be a tough battle. The English would actually take the lead first. In the 67th minute, Lee Dixon's cross from the right side was struck in by David Platt at the far post. But 10 minutes later, Staunton's cross from the left side was headed in by Tony Cascarino, the substitute. And the match ended as a diplomatic 1-1 tie. The surprise of this match was that Graham Taylor had opted to drop Paul Gascoigne, the star of the 1990 World Cup, from the starting lineup and selected the more combative Steve McMahon in his place. Was Graham Taylor's decision to drop Paul Gascoigne from the starting lineup in a way an admission that Jackie Charlton's tactics were unplayable by most opponents?
Yeah, you could make that argument, Shahan, but of course, a number of points about this. It appears as well, and this came out in later years, that Graham Taylor, in the run up to this game, had been tipped off. And I think it's no surprise to determine who the source of the tipping off was. It would have been Paul McGrath. That Paul Gascoigne was going to be targeted in this game by the Irish if he had played. And maybe Graham Taylor felt that maybe even though Paul Gascoigne, he had broken out at Italia 90 and he was one of the stars of the tournament, maybe his temperament was still a little bit open to question. And maybe Graham felt that in a pressurised Cooker environment, such as this game was going to be in Lansdowne Road, that perhaps maybe it was not an ideal place for Paul Gascoigne, in that we might see the worst of Paul Gascoigne. I mean, maybe Graham Taylor's thinking was that maybe, okay, if Paul Gascoigne had been subject to a provocation, which no doubt he would, he would have been subject, I think, to some fairly physical enough tackling, I'd say, from some of the Irish players. And there was a possibility as well, maybe, that Paul Gascoigne might have somewhat lost his discipline in that particular game. Because as we were to see at the end of this season, in the FA Cup final, sort of, he did, that infamous tackle on Gary Charles, he did lose his discipline somewhat, and he ended up injuring himself and he was out for the following season as a result. So maybe Graham felt that maybe mentally, maybe Paul Gascoigne wasn't ready yet for a pressurised and hostile environment, which this game in Dublin was going to be. And I mean, really, this was going to be a monumental game in the whole qualifying group. And it was really going to be a war of attrition. I mean, because there was virtually nothing between the Republic of Ireland and England at that stage. So, I mean, these games were never going to be classic encounters. And too much at stake. And the fact that both players and both teams knew the opposing players so well. It was really a case of England were going to cancel us out and we were going to cancel England out. So in many ways, maybe a draw wasn't that surprising a result. But the game itself, there was huge, of course, anticipation and huge excitement about this particular game here in Ireland. I even remember I was in school at the time, and that afternoon we were all given the afternoon off class and we went into the school hall to watch the game live on television. So, I mean, that was an indication of the excitement that this particular game generated. As you said, it was something of a poor enough game as a spectacle. I think maybe in an overall sense, maybe we had slightly the better of it and possibly could have won that particular game. Because I don't recall England having too many chances in that game. And the goal they did score was something of a breakaway. And then we applied pressure. Tony Cascarino came on and he brought the house down with his headed equaliser. And I remember towards the end of that game, I think Ray Houghton, I think he had a chance as well. I know he had a glorious chance in the following game at Wembley, but I think in this particular game, he had a chance towards the finish as well that could have won the games. So I think overall, I think England and Graham Taylor would have been happy with getting a draw out of this particular game because, I mean, Lansdowne Road and Dublin was becoming a notoriously hard place for opposing teams to get a result from. But, of course, the other, I suppose, the old chestnut that reared its head again, unfortunately, was the state of the pitch once again, in that Gary Lineker and John Barnes in particular, they were very critical of the state of the pitch. But I suppose, as we have discussed on some editions of this in the past, Jack Charlton often encouraged the groundsmen to leave the grass on Lansdowne Road somewhat long, in that it would stifle the playmaking efforts of the opposition team. So in an overall sense, even though we had the better of the game overall and possibly could have won it, I suppose a draw was a satisfactory outcome. But the only difficulty about that from an Irish perspective was that it sort of put pressure on us going into the return game the following match at Wembley, in that because we had dropped a point at home, we were really going to have to get something from this game at Wembley, because with only one team qualifying, every single point dropped could be costly indeed. And there was a danger as well at this stage that if England and Ireland were to cancel each other out in their games, Poland could nip in and grab the sole qualifying spot. So, yeah, but all that was in the future. But for now, anyway, even though there was a little sense of disappointment that we didn't win the game, it was a draw. We had kept ourselves top of the group, albeit because we had a superior goal difference at that stage. And Yeah, overall, I think it was a case of satisfaction all around. In that Graham Taylor, from an English point of view, of course, had dropped Paul Gascoigne and still they came out of Dublin with a point. So I suppose it was satisfactory from an English point of view as well.
We come to the end of the calendar year 1990. We start with the new year, 1991. There's a friendly early in the year. So on February 6th, 1991, the Irish travel to Wrexham to face Wales. Now, this is a Wales that has many familiar faces: Neville Southall, Kevin Ratcliffe, Ian Rush, Dean Saunders, among others, managed by Terry Yorath. In a match that was played, that was with the Orange Ball, right? Because of the
That's right. I
snow.
was about
Yeah.
yeah, the famous orange ball. That's
Yeah.
right. Because of the fact that there was snow on the pitch. There was actually talks ahead that game wouldn't take place in Wrexham, and even up to a couple of days beforehand, there was a possibility that the game could have been switched to Anfield due to the weather conditions that were being experienced in Wales at that particular time. But a couple of days before the match, anyway, it was decided that the game would go ahead in Wrexham. But yeah, it was something of a novelty, all right, seeing a white pitch and an orange ball. Certainly
Mm.
unique in those times, anyway.
For this match, we have Bonner, Dennis Irvin, Kevin Moran, Paul McGrath, Staunton, John Byrne of Brighton, Alan McLaughlin, who now had joined Southampton, Andy Townsend, Kevin Sheedy of Everton, Bernie Slavin of Middlesbrough. He'd be replaced by David Kelly of Leicester in the 67th minute, and Niall Quinn. So as you can see, there's some withdrawals, no Whelan or Houghton among others. So you get a chance to see the likes of Byrne and McLaughlin start, and even Kevin Sheedy's back in the lineup. Aldridge is missing, of course, as well. So you have Bernie Slavin up front. And I believe Moran was captaining the team that day in the absence of McCarthy.
Yeah, that's right.
This match ends as a 3-0 win for the Irish, an away win, and with many goals. Another rarity for the Irish. So the Irish take the lead in the 24th minute. Kevin Sheedy's cross from the left side was headed in by Niall Quinn. Niall Quinn would double the lead in the 67th minute when, from the middle, McLaughlin sent in a cross in the box and Niall Quinn knocked it in. Just before the end, in the 87th minute, from the left side, Kevin Sheedy sent John Byrne through to score, and the Irish were victorious 3-0, ahead of their key return fixture against England.
Yeah, well, all told, it was another good performance. Three goals scored away from home, which again was something of a rarity up to then, but thankfully in the seasons afterwards was to become a much more regular occurrence. So it was an all-round good performance. I remember watching that game. Again, it was televised live in Ireland. Wales were reasonably good at the time. I mean, they were enjoying something of a renaissance at this stage under Terry Yorath. And as you may recall later that season, they were to beat the Germans 1-0 in Cardiff. The Germans, of course, being the world champions at this stage. So, I mean, Wales were very much on an upward trajectory as well. And of course, they, needless to say, would have played a similar type of game to maybe both ourselves and to an extent the English as well. So it was ideal preparation for this upcoming game at Wembley. But yeah, a good performance all round in the ice and with the orange ball. And I don't think Ireland were ever in danger in this game, to be honest. And again, a 3-0 win away from home against an up and coming Welsh team was further indication that Ireland were they were certainly going to be taken seriously by all opposition that they came up against. And of course, needless to say, it was ideal tuning for what was going to be a monumental qualifying game the following month at Wembley against England.
That match against England at Wembley was on March 27th. For this match, we have the following lineup: Bonner, Irvin, Staunton, O'Leary, Kevin Moran, captain of the team. Again, Mick McCarthy is missing. Townsend, McGrath, Houghton, Niall Quinn, John Aldridge. He'd be replaced by Tony Cascarino in the 72nd minute and Kevin Sheedy. England would take the lead in the 9th minute when Staunton headed out across towards Dixon on the right side, and he struck from the outside of the box, and his shot was deflected off of Staunton past Bonner. In some places, I've seen the goal credited as an own goal, in some places to Lee Dixon, but most sources I've seen it credited to Lee Dixon.
Yeah, because I remember he commentated that game when the ball went into the net. George Hamilton, who was a commentator, shrieked, and it's an own goal off Staunton. So I think,
Yeah.
yeah, here anyway, it would have been credited as an own goal.
But the Irish would come back into the match and in the first half would tie the match. In the 27th minute, McGrath's cross from the right side was struck in by Niall Quinn and the match was tied. And the Irish would be the better team in this match, in a match at Wembley. So, in retrospect, was there a feeling that perhaps Ireland let the opportunity of qualification slip away from these two encounters against England, especially this match?
Yeah, without a doubt, Shahan, this was really regarded even to this day as the one that got away because it's no exaggeration to state that if Ireland had won this particular game, they would have ended up going to Euro 92 and not England. I know now this might be a side topic, but maybe just a quick point about that. I mean, from an English point of view, as we all know, Graham Taylor he was getting a lot of criticism at the time, and of course, the subsequent years he was to get more criticism. But what a lot of people in England tend to overlook is that, I mean, England were fortunate to qualify for Euro 92 in many ways, because, I mean, I thought, whatever about the game in Leinster Road, we certainly had the better of this game at Wembley. And had we won this game at Wembley, as I say, we would have gone to Euro 92 and not the English. So, I mean, people were castigating Graham Taylor for the English performances at Euro 92, but what a lot of people tend to overlook is that England were fortunate to qualify for Euro 92 in the first place. And then the other question is, if England had not qualified for Euro 92, would Graham Taylor have remained as manager for the 94 World Cup qualifiers? I
It's
suppose,
very doubtful. Yeah.
questions we'll never know at this stage. But anyway, going back to this particular game, this was really a monumental game, as I said already. And I think it's fair to say that it was one of the finest Irish performances of that era, and certainly one of the finest performances under Jack Charlton, because really it was a game we should have won. England got a somewhat fortunate goal, as you mentioned early on in the game. We equalised in almost half an hour in, which was quite an exquisite goal from Niall Quinn, who wasn't really, shall we say, known too much for his prowess on the ground. But he managed to get up well and knock the ball into the corner of the net. Even though he was jumping, he knocked it in with his left foot, which was quite a good goal if you look at it again. But prior to that, we getting that equalising goal, I mean, there was a period in that game, I'd say for about 6 or 7 minutes, where England could not come out of their own half. We were absolutely murdering them, both in possession. I mean, it was a real back to the wall job for England. And I think it was the first time I recall, anyway, and I'd say for a lot of people as well, seeing England play at Wembley and an English team being on the back foot for so long, playing at Wembley. And what was pleasing about the Irish performance as well was, Shahan, it wasn't just a case of long ball tactics either. I mean, there was times in that game where we were knocking the ball around almost like a continental team, which was pleasing on the eye as well. And that was paying dividends for us. Now, the game was tied up at the break 1-1. Second half, was this the game that actually Lee Chapman made his debut in?
He made his debut. He replaced Tony Adams in the second half.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at half time. Yeah, I remember that he came on at half time and that. And of course, he was an up and come player with Manchester United at this stage too. But yeah, the second half continued more or less in the same vein as the first. I mean, Kevin Sheedy missed a good chance about maybe on the hour mark. And then, of course, maybe with about 10 or 15 minutes to go, of course, there was a famous miss by Ray Houghton when he inexplicably had the ball in front of goal and inexplicably missed the target. People going about the goals he scored, both at Euro 88 and again in USA 94. But this, I think, is a miss too that he'll be remembered for as well. It was really an inexplicable miss. And I mean, those of us watching the game, we couldn't understand why the ball didn't hit the net. Even Jack Charlton himself couldn't understand it. And that ultimately was the one that got away, because had that shot gone into the net, Ireland would have won the game and would have ultimately qualified for the European Championships. Now, even though it was a sense that we left a point after us, we were still in a good position because we had a superior goal difference to England, and it was kind of taken that we would get the better of Poland as well, and that because of that, if we were to win all our remaining games, which was quite possible at that stage, we would stay ahead of England on the goal difference anyway. So it was seen that sort of, even though it was in many ways a point, maybe in some ways, maybe an insurance point that we left behind us, we were still in a good position because we were still top of the group. And of course, Poland had made up the ground on ourselves in England at that stage, because while we were drawing the two games against England, Poland had been beaten Turkey both at home and away. So at this stage, halfway through the campaign, you had a three-way tie between ourselves, England, and Poland, who were all on 4 points. Of course, 2 points for the win in those days. But even though we came out of the game undefeated, satisfactory performance, really had the better of the game, it still proves the old adage that when you have the opportunity to win these games, you have to take them, because our next game was to be against Poland at home, and it was one of those games, unfortunately, where nothing seemed to go right for us on the day.
This match against Poland was on May 1st at Dublin at Lansdowne Road. For this match, we have the following lineup: Bonner, Irvin, O'Leary, Moran, captain of the team, Staunton, Houghton, McGrath, Townsend, Sheedy, Aldridge. He'd be replaced by Bernie Slavin in the 68th minute, and Niall Quinn, and he'd be replaced by Tony Cascarino in the 71st minute. And like you said, the Irish were expected to win this match, but nothing went in. They had to settle for a scoreless tie. In hindsight, perhaps this match was Ireland's undoing in the end, as they really had to win at home. Perhaps a year or two ago, they would have. Was that the feeling at the time?
Yeah, very much so, because I remember, again, it was played on a midweek afternoon, the 1st of May in Dublin. And of course, following the performances against England and the fact we were top of the group at that stage, there was huge expectation around this game. And maybe as well, Shahan, certainly in the minds of some fans, maybe a bit of overconfidence in that, because, and there was actually a leading journalist at the time here in Ireland, Con Houlihan, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. He was a well-known sports writer, and even he commented in a newspaper article for one of the Irish papers the evening prior to the game. He was kind of cautioning against this overconfidence and wild optimism, because as he was saying that all the speculation he was encountering about this game was not about the result, but about the winning margin. In other words, how much Ireland were going to win by. And as he was making the point, that's a very dangerous, situation to fall into. And as it turned out, it was, because it was really in this game, okay, nothing went right for us on the day. I mean, we had the better at the game, but it was one of those games where the ball just wouldn't go into the net. I remember chances going whizzing outside the post at both sides, both in the first half and the second half. And it was really just one of those games kind of where the ball just wouldn't go into the net. And as you say, it ultimately turned out to be our undoing, because again, going back to the Wembley game, I mean, if we had won the Wembley game, it would have given us a cushion to, I suppose, prepare ourselves for maybe a dropped point such as this against Poland. But the fact that we didn't win the Wembley game, and then also later that afternoon, England went to Turkey and won 1-0. So all of a sudden, in the space of a few hours, England had gone back into pole position in the group. And of course, I mean, Poland had to get a result in Dublin as well to keep alive their own hopes of qualifying for the Euro. So it was a really disappointing performance. The feeling of letdown was something similar to the feeling of letdown experienced the previous June in the World Cup against Egypt. Except the only difference was that even though the Poland game was a disappointment, it was in one way a little bit easier to take, because, I mean, we had created numerous chances in the game, and it was just one of those days where the ball, for whatever reason, just wouldn't go into the net. Now, I mean, if Ireland had won that game, okay, you could say it was a point dropped, but then there's perhaps another way of looking at it as well. Now, I know this is all wishful thinking, but if Ireland had won that game, Poland would really have been more or less eliminated at that stage. And then would Poland, particularly the following autumn for their game against England, where they still had a slight chance of qualifying, would the Poles have been up for that game as a result? I mean, it's really hard to know at this stage. But for now, anyway, as I say, the game was a major disappointment. All of a sudden, it meant that we were on the back foot in the group because we were now going to have to depend on England slipping up in one of their two remaining games. And we were going to have to win our two remaining games, which were both going to be away from home against both Poland and Turkey. And these games would take place the following autumn. But for now, anyway, yeah, even though we went out of it, it was a major disappointment. And we were really now, I suppose, in many ways, in second place in the group due to this drop point at home against Poland. And then, of course, the drop point at Wembley as well against England. Because even though we were still unbeaten, Shahan, after 4 games, we had played all our 3 home games at this stage. And 3 of those 4 games had been draws. So really, I mean, that was something of our Achilles heel as well. So yeah, as I say, it was really a case of disappointment all around, and we were really going to be up against it now as regards in relation to qualifying for the Euros.
The season ends with 2 friendlies. So on May 22nd, the Irish host Chile, South American side Chile, at Dublin at Lansdowne Road. We have the following lineup: Jerry Payton of Bournemouth in goal, Chris Hughton, who had now joined West Ham United, David O'Leary. He'd be replaced by Paul McGrath in the 7th minute after an injury, I believe. Moran, captain of the team in Mick McCarthy's continuous absence. Staunton, Houghton, he'd be replaced by Alan McLaughlin in the 63rd minute. Making his international debut, Roy Keane of Nottingham Forest.
Yeah.
John Sheridan, Townsend, Sheedy, he'd be replaced by Tony Cascarino in the 70th minute, and David Kelly of Leicester. Now, this is a match where I have been unable to find any video footage from. The match ends as a 1-1 tie. Chile takes the lead in the 64th minute through Fabian Estee, and the Irish tie the match in the 82nd minute through David Kelly. Obviously, this match is significant for the debut of Roy Keane. Now, what can you say about his status at this point and these beginnings in green for the future Ireland legend?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was the debut of a player that really was to become a totem of Irish soccer in the following years. And I think even to this day, it's accepted without question, that he has been one of Ireland's greatest ever soccer players. But yeah, he had been signed from Cove Ramblers in the summer of 1990 for Nottingham Forest, being signed by Brian Clough. And it was really the 1991 season was really his breakthrough season in England. And of course, he had established himself in the Nottingham Forest first team. They had got to the FA Cup final that year as well, where they lost to Tottenham. Of course, the famous match that Paul Gascoigne injured himself in. But Roy Keane had played in that game, and it was Forest's run to the cup final, and the fact that they were a strong enough team in the old English First Division at that stage as well, that would have meant that Roy Keane would have enjoyed something of a high profile. He was certainly coming to the attention of, I suppose, just about all opposition managers in England. And of course, the fact that he was Irish as well, meant that he was very much coming on Jack Charlton's radar. So I think it was that Forest's run to the FA Cup final really catapulted him into major prominence and catapulted him onto the international stage as well. Even though I have no doubt he would have been capped for Ireland, but the fact that Forest had played the FA Cup final just a few days prior to this would have meant that he would have been seen on the world stage. So yeah, no surprise that he really made his debut in this particular game, and what a player he turned out to be. But you mentioned there about no highlights being available. Actually, this game wasn't televised in Ireland. I'm not even sure, was there highlights of the game even shown here for some reason. But from what I can gather anyway, it was a very nondescript game. I suppose maybe a real end of season
Very
encounter. And
surprising for a home match that there's no
yeah,
footage.
yeah, and I don't think I'm open to correction this, Shahan, but I don't think, which was surprising as well, I don't think the game was a sellout either. I think Chile possibly could have been maybe doing a tour of maybe Northern Europe at this time, and maybe it tied in with their itinerary that they would play a game in Dublin. But yeah, as I say, it was surprising because I don't recall even watching highlights of this game. And as you say, yeah, no footage of it on YouTube. So as regards footage, just little we can go on. We can only really go on newspaper reports. But yeah, I mean, a fairly nondescript game by all accounts, and I suppose in many ways a typical end of season encounter. And of course, made notable by the debut of Roy Keane in the Irish colours.
The season ends with another friendly on June 1st. The team travels to Boston, Massachusetts, to the Foxborough Stadium to face the United States, the 1994 World Cup hosts. For this match, we have the following lineup: Bonner, Dennis Irvin, he'd be replaced by John Sheridan in the 65th minute. Returning captain Mick McCarthy, Kevin Moran, Staunton, Houghton, McGrath, Townsend, Sheedy, David Kelly, and Tony Cascarino. Again, you have some players missing: John Aldridge, Niall Quinn, and that's why Tony Cascarino and David Kelly start up front. But as far as the match ends as a 1-1 tie. The Irish would meet the United States twice more in the following year.
And I think what was noticeable about the squad for this game as well, Shahan, was that it contained one player from the League of Ireland, namely a player called Johnny Glynn from Galway United. And he had come to prominence in the domestic scene in Ireland that season because Galway had won the FAI Cup, which would be the domestic cup competition in the Republic of Ireland. They beat Shamrock Rovers in the final. So he came to prominence, and as a result, he ended up being named in the squad for this particular game.
The match itself ends as a 1-1 tie. The Irish take the lead in the 57th minute when Bonner sent a long punt upfield and Cascarino scored from the edge of the box. The United States would tie the match in the 68th minute. On the left side, on the American half, Michalik sends a long cross to the middle. Chris Henderson headed it, and this sent Eric Winalda through, and he chipped over Bonner from the edge of the box. Match ended as a 1-1 tie.
Just a matter of interest, Shahan, can you recall, was that game televised in the US?
You have to remember one thing. Around this time, USA's matches would have been shown on a cable channel. I believe it was Sports Channel America. So it's not like it was broadcast on terrestrial television. There was not much interest at this point in America for
No, no,
national team matches.
no,
So, but it would
no.
have been on cable television, and if you had cable, you had a chance to watch it. But even then, the ratings would have been scant because of state of soccer in the United States at this point.
Yeah, no, it was only why I asked Shahan was. I mean, this game wasn't shown in Ireland, and I have been unable actually to locate any highlights of it. I think actually the following weekend, I think just the goals from the match were shown on a sports program here in Ireland. But I
Yeah.
mean, that was really the only thing I recall of this
Yeah,
particular game.
I believe I must have uploaded those highlights.
I must have a look. But yeah, which was surprising really because I mean, particularly for the away games, I mean, Ireland had such a following at that stage. It was surprising in one way that maybe the game wasn't shown in Ireland because I do remember the following summer in the US Cup of '92, there was two of Ireland's games were shown live in Ireland. So I don't know why this particular game in '91 wasn't shown, but I suppose there you go. But yeah, again, haven't seen any footage of it, so can really go on whatever reports I would have got to hand over the years. But yeah, again, it seems like another kind of end of season game. And why they went to America to play this game, maybe it was be thinking ahead, maybe to the playing in USA '94. And then the fact that maybe they knew at this stage they would be going back there the following summer to play in the '92 US Cup. And
Yeah.
maybe they felt
And
that
also
maybe
think
again,
about the venue, Boston,
yeah,
which is looked
absolutely.
upon as, the Irish stronghold in America. So there's that added
Correct.
value.
Yeah. Because actually, if we can jump forward for a moment, actually, to the 94 World Cup, there was an expectation there and a hope that Ireland would have been drawn to play in Boston, but it wasn't to be. Again, because of, the whole Irish diaspora and the Irish heritage associated with Boston. But yeah, but going back to this game anyway, yeah, I suppose really another, I suppose, in the season sort game where it ended in a 1-1 tie. And again, I suppose it would have obviously given a run out to some players, and I suppose maybe at the end of a long hard season, of course, how fit or how I suppose maybe energetic players would have been is open to question. But yeah, I mean, it was a run out anyway, and I suppose maybe every game is a useful exercise. So yeah, a 1-1 tie at the end of the game. So, and I suppose maybe from a commercial point of view, Shahan, it took the Irish soccer team into the United States and into a place with a lot of Irish heritage, namely Boston. So maybe it was maybe used as an opportunity as well, to kind of maybe exploit the Irish fan base out there. So maybe from a commercial point of view, it would have served the purpose as well, Ireland going to Boston to play a game against the USA.
Looking on the season as a whole, just like the previous season, there are not many experiments. The only debutants were Irvin and Keane, who would be mainstays of the team into the next decade. And we touched up on this on our last podcast about the previous season, but were there only certain types of players that were adaptable to Jackie Charlton's system? Or was it more a question of lack of depth, do you think?
I think a combination of all them, Shahan. Because what we see anyway in this campaign was a kind of a gradual fading, or a gradual, shall we say, fading out of some players, namely Ronnie Whelan, for instance, maybe Kevin Moran to an extent, maybe one or two others as well. Jack had really imposed his own style on the team at this stage. And I mean, Jack was loyal to particular players as well, there's no doubt about that. And particularly players that could fit into his system and play his system well. So there was sort of, to an extent, a lack in depth there. But as I said, that was offset then by the arrival this particular season of the two players that hail from Cork, namely Dennis Irwin and Roy Keane. I don't recall any other players kind of breaking through for Ireland this particular season. And I think the following season as well, I don't recall any players breaking through either. Yeah, so I mean, both of those players, needless to say, were to become mainstays of the Irish soccer team for the next decade or so, and a little longer at that. But yeah, there was a sort of a lack of a strength in depth there to an extent, because then some of the old guard were kind of getting on in years as well. I mean, by 1991, Paul McGrath, for instance, would have been 32. David O'Leary would have been in his 30s as well. Packy Bonner would have been in his 30s, and several other players too. The passage of time maybe would have been slowly catching up with him. So there was a little bit of that too. But yeah, I mean, you could say maybe a lack of strength in depth and maybe kind of a rigidness to the system Jack Charlton was playing. But yeah, a combination of all those factors, I would say.
In closing, what was the takeaway from this international season? Was there a feeling that Ireland had built up on the 1990 World Cup success?
There was, yeah. We certainly would have consolidated on that success, it's fair to say. Now, obviously, the disappointment would have been that even though, there was still an overall sense of satisfaction with the way we were performing. I mean, we had gone through the season unbeaten, both home and away, and both in friendlies and competitive matches. But I suppose the two disappointments would have been failing to win the games at Wembley against England, and then, of course, that home game in May against Poland in Lansdowne Road. They would have been the two disappointments, because they really would have kind of made us second favourites at this stage as regards qualifying for the Euros. But as we will see in our next podcast on this topic, we'll see the following autumn how that qualification campaign played to its conclusion and so on. But yeah, I think there was a feeling of consolidation there, and that, we were still a difficult team to beat. And we were still, I suppose, you could say, we were still kind of part of the top table of world soccer at this stage, because no team enjoyed playing us, and no team particularly enjoyed coming to Dublin to play us. So, yeah, I think with all that in mind, even though, okay, I mean, we had played four qualifying games and we had drawn three of them, And that was sort of a worry as well, that we weren't maybe converting some of these draws into victories. But yeah, I mean, in an overall sense, I mean, there was still satisfaction there. And as I said at the start of this podcast, I mean, this was the time now when the Republic of Ireland team were beginning to reach their zenith. And that was to continue really up to the World Cup in '94, when they were really enjoying their peak years under, both as a team and also their peak years under Jack's management.
With that, I would like to thank you for your participation in this series. All our respective contact information is listed on the blog and podcast uploads. So, John, thank you once again and hope to continue these discussions on football history
Yeah, thanks very much, Shahan, as always, and looking forward to the next one.
for sure. Thank you.